Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My name is Hussain Hashim. I graduated from Roshni Medical College and after getting fellowship with Professor Tariq in 2008, and after that I left country and I did my fellowship in the European Board and then in stroke medicine from Austria. And for the last 7 years I was working as a consultant neurologist and stroke specialist in National Hospital Dubai. The talk that was treat me, it's a very long topic. Now it's considered a subspecialty. People are doing 2 years fellowship in headache management. So it's very difficult to mention all latest advances and treatment option in one talk. I tried my best to include most of the things. In this presentation, we will discuss brief classification of ICHB, that is the latest one, which is very extensive classification, and more than 1,000 types of headaches are there existing, and so I have just brief this classification into just 2 types, and then we will discuss red flags for the headache that are very important for those people who are related to the management of the headache in emergency department. And then what are the diagnostic criteria of main types of the primary headache, and then management option, and finally we will discuss about recent advances in headache management. This is most valid classification, International Headache Society classification. It has classified headache into 2 main types: primary type of headache and secondary type of headache. There are only 3 primary type of headache that don't have any underlying etiology: migraine, which in itself has many sub-classification, tension type headache, and third is trigeminal autonomic sepalgia. There are many other small non-significant primary type of headache, we will not discuss it here. And then there are a very huge list of secondary type of headache. That may be due to underlying trauma, underlying any structural pathology, any vesical malformation, any infectious or non-infectious pathology. These are very important. These are especially for those people, especially resident, medical student, and the people in area physician. Thunderclap headache. That is very important. If the patient came with the first ever very severe headache, and that he didn't have any this type of headache before, along with especially nausea and vomiting, so and patient does not have any history of migraine or any other sepalgia before, so you have to be very alert, and immediately this patient should go imaging study to rule out any subarachnoid hemorrhage or any other formation. Any new type of headache, irrespective of age, if patient is young or old, if he is presenting for the first time new type of headache, that is very important to consider. Don't ignore this headache, and you have to investigate, you have to take history in detail for this type of headache. Headache with neurologic sign. If patient came with a headache with focal numbness on the face, on the arm, if patient has any speech difficulty, or patient has any vision loss, or any cranial nerve involvement, that is very important and it's a serious situation, and you have to do urgent imaging study, and you cannot ignore any patient, this kind of patient presenting in emergency. Don't send these patients home without doing any proper imaging and consultation with the neurologist or neurosurgeon. Then headache in pregnancy. As we know that this is a hypercoagulable state. Most of the patients, especially in our part of the world, because these pregnant patients, when they are coming from the faraway area, from the villages, they are dehydrated and they are hypercoagulable state, so their chances of having CVT, any other, and ischemic stroke as well. So if the patient has first-time headache in pregnancy, so you have to investigate properly in this case. Headache in elderly, especially if the patient are more than 70 years of age, and they have dementia, they have a lot of other things, and the cognition is not correct, so maybe they will forget any prior small injury. So for these patient injuries, it is very important to rule out any for acute or chronic subdural hematoma. Progressive headache. That is another entity, it's very important. If the patient has headache for last 6 months or 1 year and that is progressively increasing and it is associated with any other focal neurological sign, that is also alarming, and we should rule out any underlying, any infectious, non-infectious or neoplastic pathology. And change in frequency of quality of headache. Another entity is that if the patient has migraine before even, or tension type of headache before, but this time patient is coming that is severe headache, and the nature of headache is totally different from the previous headache, that is also alarming sign. Now the migraine, that is very common, and especially it's common in young population, it's more frequent in female, and around 20 to 30% of the female, especially the young working female, they are affected from this type of headache. And there are many other subtype of migraine, we will not discuss all these in detail. There are different pathologies, the pathogens still not yet is established. Previously the old theory was as a vascular theory, that there is vasoconstriction followed by the vasodilatation. Okay, certain few points that are going in the favor of vascular theory, that we know that there are two types of migraine, that aura and without aura. And aura of these symptoms, these are focal symptoms, numbness, any weakness or any speech deficit before starting headache. And it is thought that during this aura period there is vasoconstriction, blood supply to a certain area of the brain reduces, patient develops these focal neurological signs before starting headache, followed by the vasodilatation and when patient starts headache. There are certain medications whose mechanism of action is vasoconstriction and they are very effective, so that this theory is somehow still existing. Another theory is that is current concept is that is a mixture of vascular and neurologic origin. It originates as neurologic even in the brainstem. Its trigeminal nerve ganglion is stimulated, and there is also vasodilatation, and there is a role of serotonin release in the pathogenesis of headache. You can see that this is aura phase, and during this aura phase it is thought that there is vasoconstriction of the vessel, so that's why patient develop these focal symptoms, either numbness, speech deficit or any other focal weakness. Most of the time if the patient presents with aura and if aura is very prolonged, these patients are confused that this patient is having maybe some sort of stroke. And during next phase when headache starts, the same vessel they start to vasodilate and patient started having headache. This is another picture that can explain that during aura phase, due to vasoconstriction, the blood supply to the area of the brain, specific area of the brain, is reducing during aura phase due to vasoconstriction. And when headache starts, vessels tend to vasodilate and then headache patient and headache start. The patient history, it's very important. I think history, we know that it's very important, and most of the 80% of diagnosis we can make it, and depending upon the history. But headache is that, category, that history is very more important as compared to other entities. Even 90% of the diagnosis we can make just depends upon the history and without any other investigation. We don't need any imaging, we don't need any other electrophysiological study to prove that this is especially for the primary type of headache, that is migraine, tension type of headache. There are specific criteria we will mention in the next few slides. Patient diary is very important. If you have patient who has an tension type of headache, migraine or cluster type of headache, you have to ask the patient and he should make the diary. It's very important because you have to manage patient whether this patient needs prophylaxis or needs only just only rescue medication. It depends upon the diary of the patient. Take separate history of each type of the headache. And in children it's very difficult because they will give us a mixed type of history, so it's still very difficult to differentiate between migraine and this tension type of headache. This is diagnostic criteria. Most of the people know the diagnostic criteria of migraine without aura. At least patient should have 5 attacks of unilateral pain, and these attack duration should be more than 4 to 72 hours. Unilateral, moderate to severe in intensity, pulsating type of headache, and there is one very important, it should be aggravated by the routine physical activity. no other type of headache, like tension type of headache or primary trigeminal cephalgia, that are aggravated by the routine physical activity like sleep, like diet, like stress. Only this, migraine and its value, they are aggravated with the routine activity. And patient should have either nausea and vomiting, photophobia, phonophobia, one out of them, not all together. This is migraine with aura. The main criteria is the same, but aura symptom, as I already discussed, that it should be in the form of visual obscuration, flashing of light, zigzag line, either in the form of the numbness or paresthesia, tingling sensation on the face, on the arm. Sometimes there is visual loss, hemianopia, or other, sometimes increased scotoma. These are different form of aura. So that's why due to these aura, these patients are confused with the stroke. Tension type of headache. This is more diffuse type of headache. This is more common in our part of society, but it's underdiagnosed and sometimes it's confused with migraine and other type of headache. Tension type of headache is moderate, mild to moderate in intensity. It will not be more severe. The patient will be working, there will be no much disturbance in the daily routine life, and it will extend up to weeks. It can extend from days to weeks, mild to moderate, and there will be no nausea, vomiting, and there will be stress or depression. You have to look for the element of depression, stress, or other stressful lifestyle. Trigeminal or autonomic cephalgia. This is less common as compared to previous two types. There are many subtypes of this kind of headache, like cluster headache, residual hemicrania, hemicrania tentina, some that is very short lasting headache, stabbing like pain, and there is another called suna. Okay. This is actually uncommon as compared to the other type of headache, and this is associated with this autonomic symptom. These autonomic symptoms you cannot see in the patient with a migraine. Patient will be having unilateral pain, periorbital, supraorbital region along with the ptosis, conjunctival injection, lacrimation, nasal congestion, or rhinorrhea. This is very important to make diagnosis of trigeminal autonomic cephalgia. Headache, the principle of management. First of all, you have to take very clear history and establish the diagnosis, whether it is migraine or some of its variant, where it is the tension type of headache or any type of trigeminal autonomic cephalgia. Unless you make a clear-cut diagnosis, the treatment guidelines, management approaches are different for these type of headache. So, key is first you have to establish the diagnosis, pre-technique. No need to wait. If the patient has a mild type of migraine, you have to take early measures. You have to ask the patient to change lifestyle and treat with very simple medication. Use adequate doses. The usually common practice is that the patient is not responding to 1 or 2 tablets of Panadol. We add Brufen, then other Votrane, then maybe other strong analgesic. This practice is very wrong. You have to just use adequate dose. Even maybe this patient will simply improve with the increased doses of paracetamol. So you have to use adequate doses, and there is another type of medication overuse headache. That is usually attributed to misuse of this medication. Tailor treatment to the severity of attack. There is no clear-cut, regimen for all types. There is no unique regimen. So you have to start treatment on an individual basis, depending upon the severity of the attack or the frequency of the attack. Use migraine-specific therapy, like triptan medication, like ergotamine, and all these patient has migraine. Preventive strategy, you have to decide about these preventive strategies depending upon the severity and frequency of headache. Okay, this treatment guidelines are updated in 2017. You can see this acute treatment. If the patient has mild to moderate attack, mild to moderate attack are those attacks that does not affect the daily routine life of the patient. Patient is having attack that is lasting less than 24 hours, mild to moderate in intensity, patient doing his work, but still the headache is there. For this one, you have to start with very simple medication, either paracetamol or simple analgesic medication. they should not use any combination. Try with one simple medication. If the patient has severe attack, okay, not responding to these medications, then you have to go for the migraine-specific medication that is called triptan. There's a long series of triptan from short-acting to long-acting, like zolmitriptan, sumatriptan, and naratriptan. So these are, you have to be very specific because there are very specific contraindication, and in presence of these contraindications, you're not supposed to start these medications. Refracting migraine strategy. If the patient is not given to either individual medication or these medications, then you have to go the combination of triptan and non-steroidal anti-inflammatory agent. You can use dihydroxyzotavine, but these days, these added components, they are not being used. People are discouraging using these medications unless patient has very refractory and is not responding to other medications. You can use combination of analgesic along with the steroid as well. Strategy for the patient who has contraindication to vasoconstrictor medication. Triptan are specifically vasoconstrictor medication. If the patient has angina, patient has chest pain, patient has TIA or ischemic stroke before, so these are absolute contraindicated. Due to this vasoconstriction, so patient might have stroke or any other aggravation of this chest pain. So these are contraindications for those patients. But these kind of patients don't use this one, but you can use different combination of NSAID, dopamine agonist, and combination analgesic you can use, but without opioid. In the next slide, I will explain that why opioids are not encouraged and are not indicated in any kind of this migraine preventive strategies. There are different level of evidence that prove that this medication are how much effective. Level A indications, these have established efficacy in the prevention of migraine. Antiepileptic medications, especially the valproic acid, Tipafine or Epimor, is very effective. Though people are not giving in this is the most effective and level A indication for this use. Beta blocker, propranolol and metoprolol and temolol, they are also at the first line. But other beta blockers, they are level B medication like probably effective. Okay, so the role is not well established like antidepressant. So we can say that amitriptyline and beta blocker, they are probably effective. Possibly effective are ACE inhibitor, ARBs, and then funny antiepileptic like carbamazepine. If you don't have these choices, then you can start, but still effective plus minus. Level U indication that these conflicting evidence are usually they are not indicated. Carbonic anhydrase inhibitor, acetazolamide, antidepressant, SRI and SNRI, and gabapentin. These are usually better to avoid these medications for the prophylaxis of migraine. And these medications, they have been tried as adjunctive medication, but these medications still have not established their efficacy in prevention of migraine. Narcotics, no more effective. There is no use. People are using these narcotics. We have seen many prescriptions that people are using very frequently, Tramadol and other these things. But there is no role of most type of these headache and there is no specific underlying pathophysiology. We know that pathophysiology either is vasoconstrictor or as a neuropathic. So narcotic doesn't fit anywhere. So that's why we discourage using this narcotic. Sedating medication, there is sedating medication, there are chances of potential abuses, there is positive reinforcement. The patient will start this narcotic, patient will, with passage of time will increase the use of these narcotics. So the rule of management, we should keep this one thing in mind that these kind of cluster headache like migraine or any other neuralgia, you cannot treat 100%. All medications, the best evidence, they are 70% effective. So you cannot say that I have migraine and fully treated. Migraine will be there, but it depends on your activity and your other strategy and all these things, you can come back. So you can prevent up to 70%. You can reduce frequency and severity of attack of migraine, but cannot 100% stop this one. And response is, you cannot predict the response. So never say to any migraine patient that I will start this medication and this will be effective. Maybe same medication is effective for half of the patient and that is not effective for other patient. Many patients are coming with side effects. Those adjustments, as I already told you, that it's very important to adjust the dose. Don't just rely on a small dose and add another dose. Because due to this strategy, patient will be misusing all these medications. Chronic migraine. if the patient is having this migraine, so you have to not only rely on pharmacologic therapy, you have to, there are many other non-pharmacologic therapy, like education of these patients is very important. You have to ask the patient should sleep at least 6 to 8 hours in a 24 hours. Diet is very important. Migraine patients should not miss their breakfast. It's very important. Sudden change of temperature from air conditioned room to go to the hot. Any cold stimulant, that is very. And in addition to the chocolate, some people are saying, though evidence is not clear that chocolate and especially and they should not be overburdened mentally or physically. And then pharmacologic therapy, as I mentioned. There are new techniques that are being used. Pain management professors, they know better all these techniques. This one, greater hospital nerve blocks. Usually with this technique, local anesthetic or steroid are given. It is 50% effective, and in one study that is 20%, there is no benefit we have seen in the patient. Patient can have local discomfort and alopecia. These are the two side effects. Botox in migraine, very effective. We are using in our center very frequently, weekly 2 to 3 patients per. It's very easy to administer. If the patient has contraindication to medication, patient has a refractory and using many medications, this is one of the techniques that we can use in migraine patients who have very severe migraine, and the migraine is affecting his daily life. That is very effective. And there are specific places. You can see that there are few muscles we have to specify. Minimum dose is 155 units to 192 units. Using corrugator, procedures frontalis, using temporalis muscle 4 places, and then occipitalis, and then trapezius muscle. 5 units at each places, and you have to repeat after 3 months. This is very effective. Patient usually comes, they remain pain-free for 2 to 3 months. So it's one of the good modalities that we can, I think, recommend to the patient who are having the refractory migraine. These are different stimulators, nerve stimulators that are being used. This is vagal nerve stimulator. It is handheld, and you don't need any much supervision. And this is also with mixed kind of evidence whether it's effective or not. Transcranial magnetic stimulator. This is used under hospital supervision. Patients sometimes have to come as an outpatient, and for a few hours we can give spinophalmic ganglion stimulator and occipital nerve stimulator. Stuffly device. This is very common in Arab countries, and in Europe it's a this device. Its main aim is that transcutaneous nerve electrical stimulation. Usually it is battery operated, and there are 2 small batteries, and usually during the work time you can apply on the forehead, and for 20 minutes we have to turn it on, and this will give you this stimulation for 20 minutes, and that is also effective for some patients. Side effects are drowsiness, and some people have vertigo, but it's still effective, and you should recommend to those patients who have contraindication to medication, especially the patient who are pregnant, who cannot take more prophylaxis, who cannot take more non-steroidal or other medication during pregnancy. So usually this is one of the good modalities. This cost is around 3,000 dirham in UAE, but I don't know whether this is available or not. But this is very common, and I think it will come soon in our part of the world. Treatment option for cluster headache. Cluster headache is not very common as compared to the migraine tension type of headache, and acute management is same, 10 with the different doses and strategy we can give. This is bridging therapy. During bridging therapy we can give steroid with different combination along with dihydroergotamine and triptan we can give, which are long active. Preventive strategy for this one, verapamil is very effective. As we know that verapamil is not effective for the migraine treatment, but for the cluster, verapamil is class 1 medication along with the other medication. You can start lithium carbonate, sodium valproate, Topamax and indomethacin as well. What are nutraceutical and other modality treatment for the headache, especially the vascular headache and migraine? What is their evidence that people are saying whether we can use it or not? For these one, the evidence is not much. Okay. Evidence is not much clear. So usually we are not encouraging this medication. Potential new therapeutic treatment, surgical procedure that are targeted, that are using like parasympathetic, we can use this surgical procedure like that target parasympathetic pathway, trigeminal nerve, or other outside trigeminal ganglia as well. Neuromodulation, it's kind of deep brain stimulation to the hypothalamus, peripheral nerve, and sphenopalatine ganglion. Still using very high in European country or in America, but it's not very common in the people are doing. You need very expert people who know how to use this one and have very good experience in doing. Deep brain stimulation, it's effective, but it has a lot of side effects, like ICH and stroke, or patient may die from this one. So that's why it needs good expertise and good center where you can do that. This is short-lasting unilateral neurologic functions headache. That headache is very short, stabbing like pain. Many people are having this one for few seconds, stabbing like pain on one side of the headache. And for the treatment option for this one is lamotrigine, topamax, gabapentin, and you can give in a serious cases a course of IV lidocaine. Tension type headache, first you have to start NSAID in the form of this one simple analgesia, aspirin, NSAID, and paracetamol. Preventive medication, the first line medication is amitriptyline, and but there is no use of SSRI and botulinum toxin in case of tension type headache. This is last slide. Medication approaches for the medication overuse headache. This is very common because many physicians, GPs they are usually make habit of the patient just to give 4 or 5. And many patients we are seeing that they coming with prescriptions, the patients taking this steroids along with this one analgesic and paracetamol continuously for 2 to 3 months. So these become habitual of using this one. So it's very difficult to these patients are having medication overuse headache in addition to the primary headache. So if they are using either paracetamol or any brufen or any aspirin, so you have to gradually taper up and add triptan and along with the other long-acting NSAID. If patient is using OPI, overusing, you have to gradually taper up and use triptan as in PRN medication along with the long-acting NSAID. This was all about update about current. There are many other things are there, difficult to but if you have any question, now you can ask or after the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hashim, for reminding us of the long topic. Our next speaker is Professor Dr. Teresa Bogart. She is our head of planning obstetrics department, and she would be speaking about dysmenorrhea, premenstrual, migraine, treatment challenges in female patients, particularly for the pelvic pain. And I also have a very unpleasant duty environment, particularly to my research, and that please find mine.
The topic for my today's CME is dysmenorrhea and chronic pelvic pain. This is a very, very common problem, and 8% of females who are either working or they are going to universities or educational institutes, they will not attend. So they will be absent from work every month for a few days, and this is like a problem which should be solved. Sometimes it's intractable, like the headache. So sometimes there is no cause. In fact, most of the time there is no cause for this. Dysmenorrhea, the definition, types, causes and management. Definition of dysmenorrhea is painful menstruation, and in Greek it means difficult monthly flow. Dysmenorrhea causes cramping in the lower abdomen, radiating to the back and legs, often accompanied by gastrointestinal, neurological symptoms, as well as general malaise. And it's very common for these ladies to have general malaise. They feel weak, fatigued, they have pain, they don't feel like working, and they'll be absent from work. The types. There are two types of dysmenorrhea. Primary dysmenorrhea, which is idiopathic. Usually there is no cause found. We do ultrasounds, we do everything, even on MRI, nothing is found. So primary dysmenorrhia is the main type, but secondary dysmenorrhia, usually there is a pathological cause for it. And when you do an ultrasound, you can identify the pathology in that. Primary dysmenorrhia is usually due to uterine hypercontractility and uterine vasospasm. And the patient will have a lot of pain, especially as soon as her cycle starts. She'll complain of pain, which is radiating to the legs, to the back, and she's very uncomfortable. She might be having a headache also associated with it. So what is the cause of this primary dysmenorrhea? The cause is usually endorphins, prostaglandins alpha and E2, vasopressin, noradrenaline, oxytocin, and it could be a neurological reason because there is relief after destruction of cervical and myometrial nerve endings at childbirth. So mostly the cause is usually due to prostaglandins, and that is why, since the cause is prostaglandin, when you give non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, the patient will respond to it. But then the flow of the blood during the menstrual cycle will reduce. Secondary dysmenorrhea has many causes, and we must look into those causes. Intrauterine causes are fibroids, intrauterine contraceptive device, polyp, Asherman syndrome, adenomyosis, PID, and in vitro virgin uterus. So if we could discuss one by one, fibroids, especially if they are subuterine fibroids, they will lead to dysmenorrhea, and even some serious if they are pedunculated and they are very mobile, they can lead to a secondary dysmenorrhea. Intrauterine contraceptive device, every time the patient has a menstrual cycle, because of the uterine spasm, the intrauterine contraceptive device tries to be expelled and leads to pain in the patient. Polyps are, you all know, they are pedunculated tumors which are inside the cavity of the uterus and inside the cavity of the cervix, and they will lead to pain and severe dysmenorrhea at the time of the menstrual cycle. Asherman syndrome is caused due to overstimulation, over-curettage of the uterine cavity, and due to adhesions which are formed between the anterior and posterior wall of the uterus. This can also lead to dysmenorrhea. Adenomyosis is a condition in which there is hypertrophy of the muscles of the uterus, usually after 2 or 3 children have been born, and the size of the uterus increases, and it is like endometriosis, and some of the blood of the menstruation, it falls between the muscles of the uterus, and this is what adenomyosis is, especially during the menstrual cycle. These patients will have severe dysmenorrhea, and there is a reason for this dysmenorrhea. Then comes PID. PID is pelvic inflammatory disease. This is caused by various organisms such as Neisseria gonorrhea, even tuberculosis, chlamydia, and the infection, it leads to this chronic inflammation, and every time the patient has a menstrual cycle, she will have severe pain. And last is the retroverted uterus. 15% of females have a retroverted uterus, and that leads to severe dysmenorrhea during the cycle. Extrauterine causes which lead to secondary dysmenorrhea are endometriosis, adhesions due to PID, previous surgery, residual ovary syndrome. Endometriosis is a condition in which there is menstruation inside from extrauterine tissues, and usually endometriosis is present in the ovaries, and every time the patient has a cycle, there is bleeding inside the pelvic cavity, And this bleeding, obviously there's tension in the tissues of the ovary and the surrounding structures, sometimes the uterosacral ligaments, and that leads to severe pain during the menstrual cycle, and the patient is incapacitated. And the main symptom of endometriosis is severe dysmenorrhea. Adenomyosis and endometriosis are related because adenomyosis is endometriosis which occurs inside the uterine muscle plates. Then adhesions due to PID, pelvic inflammatory disease. These adhesions are caused by chronic infections. The tissues, they adhere to each other, and sometimes there's a frozen pelvis. The fallopian tubes, the ovary, the broad ligament, and the tissues in the pelvis, they all adhere to each other. They are dense adhesions, and every time the patient has a cycle, and because of vasospasm, the patient will have severe pain. Previous surgery, the same reason, there will be adhesions leading to pain. For example, patient had an appendectomy done, appendix removed as a child, and then when she grows up and she starts having her cycles, this girl will have severe dysmenorrhea every time she has a cycle. Then residual ovarian syndrome. This is an interesting entity. In this condition, you remove the ovaries at the time of hysterectomy, and some part of the ovaries are left behind. Due to some reason, due to adhesions or whatever, part of the ovary is removed, and some parts of the ovary are left behind, and they lead to severe pain. Even if the patient doesn't have menstrual cycle because the uterus has been removed, she will still have pain whenever at the time of her withdrawal of hormones, because the ovary is producing those hormones, and there's a cycle going on, and she will have pain every time whenever she has that date. So sometimes the patients are right after hysterectomy when they tell you that every month they have a pain, and that is usually because of the pieces of small fragments of ovary which are left behind. Then outflow obstruction. This happens in patients who have latent duct abnormalities or have cervical stenosis. What happens in these patients is, for example, in those who have an imperforate hymen, the patient complains of severe lower abdominal pain every month without any menstruation. And when you examine her, she will have a mass in the lower abdomen because the menstruation which is taking place cannot be relieved out of the system because the hymen is closed, and all the blood which is produced due to menstruation is collected in the pelvis. So there is outflow tract obstruction, and sometimes what happens is everything else is normal and the cervix is stenosed. So there is a menstrual cycle, there is menstruation, and the blood cannot come out and cannot flow out. So it keeps collecting in the uterus, back flows through the fallopian tubes, into the pelvic cavity, and hence into the abdomen, and leads to severe pain. So then how do you manage dysmenorrhea? The management of dysmenorrhea depends on whether it is primary or secondary dysmenorrhea, and if there is a cause which can be removed, you can do that, and the dysmenorrhea will most probably be gone. In primary dysmenorrhea, since you cannot actually find a cause, you have to take a history that it starts 6 to 12 months after menarche when ovulatory cycles are established. So primary dysmenorrhea is related to ovulation. So if you stop the ovulation, the dysmenorrhea will stop. This is just common sense, okay? Just prior or during menstruation and lasts for the duration of flow only. The patient complains that the dysmenorrhea is most severe on the first day and becomes lesser and lesser as the cycle goes on. And this is the diagnosis of exclusion. 72% of patients are 19-year-old because this is the time when there is maximum ovulation, and these patients will complain, and especially they haven't had children. So this is the maximum time when they will have primary dysmenorrhea. 40% will regularly use medication, and 8% stay absent from school or work because of this dysmenorrhea. So you have to take a detailed history. The history will tell you whether it is primary dysmenorrhea or secondary dysmenorrhia. You have to examine the patient to rule out any masses or any physical cause of the dysmenorrhea, and once you find the physical cause, then it is not primary, then it is secondary dysmenorrhea. You can start medical treatment. Sometimes patients are refractory to treatment. There is an initial response followed by worsening, and then you have to find out by a pelvic scan, an MRI or laparoscopy should be considered to see that there may be a cause. Sometimes an interesting finding which you have in primary dysmenorrhea is ultrasound does not pick any mass. The ovaries are normal, the uterus is normal. When you do a laparoscopy, there is so much congestion of the tissues. The whole of the pelvic peritoneum, the ovaries, the uterus, they are so red and inflamed. That is something which ultrasound cannot pick up. This is not a physical mass, and you can't actually pick it up by, even with MRI you can't pick it up. Even ultrasound will not pick it. So only laparoscopy will tell you that there is congestion. So that's called a pelvic congestion syndrome. You can't. There is no actual physical problem, but the vessels are very hyperemic and the area is very red. So medical treatment. What medical treatment should you give? Non-steroidal anti-inflammatory are the drug of choice. Then if the patient does not respond to NSAIDs, you can start the patient off on combined oral contraceptive pill. But combined oral contraceptive pill will only work if the patient has ovulatory cycles. If there are anovulatory cycles, then COCs do not work. So you have to first confirm that the patient is having ovulatory cycles. And if you put her on the contraceptive pill, since contraceptive pills, they stop ovulation at a hypothalamic level, therefore the patient will stop having dysmenorrhea. Then other hormonal methods include, you can put them on a progesterone pill only, a cyclical pill, and they will also respond to this because progesterones, less or decrease the contractions of the uterus and reduce the spasm, and therefore these patients will respond by progesterones also. Other methods, these include like evening primrose oil. They have been tried for many, many decades. There is no strong evidence that giving evening primrose oil stops dysmenorrhea, but maybe the patient has a placebo effect and therefore her pain will be reduced. You can also give a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. You can give mefenamic acid, COX inhibitors, naproxen, ibuprofen and aspirin. Ibuprofen is preferred because it has safety and efficacy. You should commence the treatment at the start of the menstruation. Once the pain cycle starts, you cannot break it even if you give non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. So the treatment should be started as soon as the cycle starts, even if the dysmenorrhea is not present. Give drugs which have a short plasma half-life and make sure that the patient is not pregnant because all these drugs are contraindicated during pregnancy. The only problem with NSAIDs is that the blood flow during the menstrual cycle is reduced, and then the patient will start complaining that she's had a very scanty menstruation. So you have to counsel them before giving NSAIDs that this problem will occur. So you can give combined oral contraceptive pill, as I told you. It inhibits ovulation and decreases endometrial production of prostaglandins and leukotrienes by inducing endometrial atrophy. So COCs act at the level of the hypothalamus by reducing ovulation and locally by reducing the prostaglandins and leukotrienes. So it's a good treatment modality for those patients who are not responding to NSAIDs. Other treatments which you can give are NNGIUS, which is levonorgestrel intrauterine system, because it releases slow release of progesterone at the rate of 20 micrograms every month. and that thins out the endometrial lining, and plus reduces the contractions of the uterus, therefore reducing the vasospasm of the uterus, and helps in treating the primary dysmenorrhea. Then depo-progesterones, which include injections. For example, the injection of Depo-Provera, which is for 3 months. You give hydroxyprogesterone to the patient, and her contractions in the uterus are stopped, and therefore she will not have dysmenorrhea. Then progesterone only pill can also be given, which is 75 micrograms of desogestrel. It inhibits ovulation and therefore reduces dysmenorrhea. Then other drugs which can be used and which we usually are less commonly used are beta-adrenergic agonists, calcium channel blockers, transdermal glycerol trinitrate. All of these have been time tested, but results, if the patient is not responding to other treatment, only then we can use them as, not as primary agent, but as secondary agent. And other treatments which can be used are vitamin E, omega-3. Omega-3, there's a lot of talk going on about omega-3, and these days even calcium preparations are present in the market which have omega-3 in them. So, and separately also you can get it. So sometimes it can act as a placebo probably, because research has not proven that omega-3 is a very effective agent in dysmenorrhea. Secondary dysmenorrhea. So you diagnose secondary dysmenorrhea from the history. The patient will tell you that the pain increases as the cycle goes on. The pain is least on the first day and increases as the cycle goes on. And usually the patient is around 30 to 45 years, and her increase of as the menstrual cycle goes on, the pain also increases. Then you can do a clinical examination, you can do an ultrasound. Microbial cultures can be done from the endocervix and peritoneal fluid if you are suspecting pelvic inflammatory disease. And the final diagnosis can be with a laparoscopy, because it diagnoses endometriosis, adenomyosis, and it also is the gold standard to diagnose pelvic inflammatory disease. Then you can also do a stereosalpingography to diagnose congenital abnormalities of the uterus, such as uterus diadelphys, which also leads to secondary dysmenorrhea. And then you can do a hysteroscopy, which helps you to diagnose polyps. Polyps, I told you, can lead to dysmenorrhea. So that can be done also. Treatment is directed at correction of the cause. If there is pelvic inflammatory disease, you have to give a long-term antibiotic. You can do adhesiolysis with a laparoscope. Then you can do pain management by giving analgesics. Then in intractable cases, such as those with adenomyosis and endometriosis, and if the family is complete, you can go for a hysterectomy with bilateral sympingoprectomy, because unless you remove the ovaries, the pain will not be gone, because otherwise endometriosis will persist. Then chronic causes of one part of the pain was dysmenorrhea, the other part of the pain is chronic pelvic pain. Many patients come to us and all the time they are complaining of pain, and these are chronic patients who come every 10 to 15 days and they keep coming to you for years. And they have chronic pelvic pain, so we should try to take a detailed history, find out what is the reason of the chronic pelvic pain, what is the etiology, assess the type of pain they have and what is the reason. Then you can investigate also and discuss the therapeutic options. This is chronic pelvic pain is intermittent or constant pain in the lower abdomen or pelvis of at least 6 months duration, not occurring exclusively with menstruation or intercourse, and not associated with pregnancy. So these patients, they keep complaining of pain. It has nothing to do with the cycle and nothing to do with the menstruation. They are all the time complaining of pain, and this pain has been persisting for the last or previous 6 months, and then you label them as having chronic pelvic pain. The prevalence rate of chronic pelvic pain is comparable to those for migraine, backache and asthma. for a primary care physician. Causes of chronic pelvic pain, gynecological are 20%, musculoskeletal, psychological, gastrointestinal up to 30%, urological up to 31%. So you have to rule out, this is a diagnosis of exclusion, you have to find out what is the reason why the patient is having this problem. There is frequently more than one component. Assessment should aim to identify the contributory factors and assign cause to a single pathology only. So causes of gynecological causes are inflammatory, infective, inflammatory, non-infective, mechanical, functional, neuropathic and musculoskeletal. These are gynecological causes. As I told you, sometimes there is just inflammation, or you do a laparoscopy and you find that there is inflammation of the pelvic areas without actually having a mass in the ovary or in the uterus or a tumor in the uterus. Okay? So, in gynecological causes, I have already told you, inflammatory, infective, then endometriosis, vulvodynia with dermatosis. Mechanical causes can be due to uterine retroversion, adhesions. They can be functional causes, pelvic congestion and irritable bowel syndrome, which can also then residual ovary syndrome, trapped ovary syndrome, the ovaries trapped in adhesions secondary to endometriosis. Then neuropathic causes can be due post-surgical dysesthesia, vulvodynia, vulvar vestibulodynia. These are very, very rare conditions, but they are present and patient will have it. When you can't find anything, then you label them as vulvodynia. Pelvic floor myalgia, abdominal and pelvic trigger points, and postural muscle strains. Then depression, sleep disorders can also lead to chronic pelvic pain. Sexual and physical abuse and child sexual abuse also lead to pelvic pain. Then gastrointestinal causes are irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, diverticular disease, carcinoma of the colon, and rectum, endometriosis. Endometriosis also affects the intestine, that's why it's added here also. Because intestines may be affected by endometriosis and lead to pain. Chronic urethral syndrome and urological causes, chronic cystitis and radiation cystitis. You know, interstitial cystitis is a bad disease to have because the urine examination which you do doesn't show any infection, no pus cells, nothing is grown on the culture. It's just that the infection is in the walls of the bladder and it's difficult to treat. Although recently Botox treatment has been used, Botox has been injected. Just like in headache, Botox is given, it is given in interstitial cystitis also, it is injected into the bladder and leads to pain relief in these cases. So management of allow the patient to tell her story, directed question, pain diary, vaginal examination, identify any specific aches and fears, especially in those who have a sexual abuse. Then STI screening is very important. Sexually transmitted infections, recent change of partners, this is obviously for the breast, but can happen here also. Symptoms suggestive of PID, she's previously had chronic infection, maybe history of tuberculosis in Pakistan. Tuberculosis is very common, but that would not be STI. STI would be gonorrhea or chlamydia. We don't have tests for chlamydia, but we do have tests for gonorrhea and another gram-positive and gram-negative infections. So we can take a urethral swab and decide what type of an infection she has. Abnormal findings on vaginal examination can consider diagnostic laparoscopy or a scan depending how bad the findings are. No abnormality in examination, then suspect endometriosis. You can give a trial of oral contraceptive pill, GnRH analog, progestogen, danazol or analgesia. If there is no response in 3 to 6 months, do a laparoscopy to confirm. One thing which I would like to tell you is about radiological embolization of pelvic braces. I told you there's pelvic congestion syndrome, it doesn't respond to any medicine, to surgery, as you need or in those cases you can do a embolization of the these pelvic vessels through the through the pelvic blood vessels and only this can only be done by a radiologist who is trained to do it. Interventional radiologists can do that. Symptoms suggestive of irritable bowel syndrome, obviously if you give high diet, you have to give Valium and smooth muscle relaxants. Then you have to exclude certain diets, certain dairy products and grains. The urogenital symptoms you have to refer to urology or gastroenterology for the treatment. Sometimes there is a marked psychological component, so you can start an analgesia and refer to a specialist who can help them with the psychological problems. Pain management team, specialists in pelvic pain, their clinics. Brigadier Salim will tell you more about this. But as far as we are concerned, we can give NSAIDs and give polyidromone, neuropathic pain, amitriptyline, static magnetic therapy, and TENS, which is transcutaneous nerve stimulation, can be used. This was also used for the headache, so we use it for the pelvic pain also. So summary is that multidisciplinary management is sometimes needed. We can give medical therapy, sometimes surgical therapy can be used, such as electrolysis, static magnetic therapy, photographic reinforcement, and writing therapy. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Parisa. We are more grateful to her. She had a meeting of our Society of OB and Gynae, and she, despite her all engagement, she's great time for us. Our next speech is novel pharmacological management of acute musculoskeletal disorders. And speaker is Professor Dr. Muhammad Salim. He is Professor of Anesthesia, he is Professor at University University. And I believe in Rawalpindi, Islamabad, nobody needs introduction as far as anesthesia and pain management is concerned. May I request Professor Salim to have and talk to us.
मैं ज़्यादा वक्त नहीं लूँगा आप लोगों का, मुझे पता है लोग और भी हो रहे होंगे। आप लोग फाइनली लिस्ट कर रहे हैं, ये सारे डॉक्टर हैं फाइनली है ये सब और ये नॉन डॉक्टर हैं। मैंने एक किताब लिखी थी जो क्या था आपने पढ़ेंगे एनेस्थीसिया लेक्चर नोट, तो शुरू में लिखा हुआ है कि जब आप एमबीबीएस में दाखिला लेते हैं तो आप ये ना समझिए कि डॉक्टर बन गए। जब आप पास कर लेंगे एमबीबीएस तो आप समझिए कि मैं आज से डॉक्टर बना। जब पार्ट 1 करेंगे या पार्ट 2 करेंगे then you are doctor. I don't consider you MBBS as a doctor, please. No mind. आपने अभी डॉक्टर बनना है, ये असली डॉक्टर से बैठे। पेन के बारे में मेरी आवाज आ रही है आपको? I'm an old man, may not be here. सबसे पहले मैं आपको बताऊंगा पेन is definitely different thing. It is separate facility और रिफा यूनिवर्सिटी पहली यूनिवर्सिटी है कि जो पेन की एमएससी पेन करा रही है। सौ से ज़्यादा यूनिवर्सिटी हैं। रिफा यूनिवर्सिटी ओनली यूनिवर्सिटी विच इज गिविंग यू डिप्लोमा इन पेन मेडिसिन और उसका ये 2 साल का कोर्स है एंड रिकग्नाइज्ड बाय PNBC and we are running this course since 2005 and I am affiliated with this institute since 1999, which is the oldest man. और मैं आप लोगों को सिर्फ जनरल बताऊंगा कि व्हाट इज पेन एंड हाउ वी डू। पेन में एक बात है कि व्हेन इट्स एक्यूट पेन, जैसे आपको ऑपरेशन हुआ, अपेंडिक्स हुआ, कुछ हुआ, तो आप कोई जरूरी नहीं कोई एनेस्थेटिक देंगे उसको। आप एंजियोलाइटिक दे दें occasionally, appendix operation हुआ है, hysterectomy हुई है, you simply give a analgesic that is pumped occasionally. But if it is chronic pain, in acute pain there is an element of anxiety, so you give anxiolytic. In chronic pain there is an element of depression, so you have to give antidepressant. ये ना समझे कि बंदे को डिप्रेशन हो गया, but antidepressant they are also a pain killer. This is just a basic thing. The definition of pain is international association of study of pain. They say it is an unpleasant sensory and emotional experience associated with actual or potential distress. इसमें element of sensory emotion शुरू होती है. Now, pain is what the patient says. So this guy you have to accept it. And it is totally subjective feeling. And some of the people they express in different ways pain. Particularly old people, कुछ तरीके से कहेंगे, कुछ किस्म का pain है. लेकिन pain, whatever the patient says, you have to believe that he is in pain. Now, question arises, who should treat pain? Physician, surgeon, anybody can treat pain. It's not specific to the anesthesiologist. But when we started MSc pain medicine, only anesthesiologists were allowed to appear in it. But higher education told that why not to take other people? Now we have got professor, orthopedic doctor, surgeon, physician, and we all are included to learn MSc and everything. So all doctors, paramedical staff, family members play an important role in pain medicine. So, but there are some misconceptions. People they say morphine and other strong pain relievers should be reserved only in late stages. So usually they often serve severe pain. If you have a fractured femur, you can give 3 times doses of morphine, nothing else. You can give whatever the amount you can, especially morphine, 2 or 3 times. It's because pain is an antidote of morphine. And morphine and other opioids can easily cause weak respiratory depression. No, there is no respiratory depression. If patient is pain, don't worry about it. Now, categories of pain, mainly there are 3 types of categories. One is somatic pain. जैसे आप skin, muscle, connective tissue में दर्द हो जाता है, this is known as somatic pain. For example, arthritis, sprain, and this is that type of pain. And it is worse when there is movement. Most pain medicine will help, but it's weird when they need strong medication. Another is visceral pain. कि आपके पेट में दर्द है, ट्यूमर है, गैस्ट्राइटिस है, ट्यूमर पेनक्रियास है, something, and this is not localized. Rapid, constant, and dull, and less affected with movement. And this strong opioid, these are really important sort of pain. Now, the most difficult pain is neuropathic pain, or neurogenic pain, such as diabetic neuropathy, phantom pain, cancer pain, spread the nerves. And it's burning and stabbing type of pain. And pain medication you have to give antidepressant also. So that patient, antidepressant देने पड़ते हैं neuropathically. Surprisingly, antidepressant they are not painkillers. So pain, neuropathic pain is very common and very difficult to treat. Then what? And initiated by primary lesion and all dysfunctional nervous system. There is involvement of nerves also. The current treatment is tricyclic antidepressants are given, anticonvulsants such as carbamazepine, Tegretol, opiate, Revapine, and pregabalin. Pregabalin are very commonly used these days. This I have compared with pregabalin, and I think pregabalin is much better than gabalin. Dizziness, somnolence, peripheral demand, and ataxia are weight gain are less effective. So pregabalin are more commonly used. The most important thing is how to measure pain. There is no criteria, but there is verbal analog scale that ranges from no pain to extreme. One is on one side, no pain, maximum pain. Patient points are down there. This is VAS, visual analog scale, no pain, put a hand on this. For children, different faces are there. And this is another stage. So this is actually what we thought. It may be difficult for our patients in Pakistan how to say. The patient ने कितना ज़्यादा उन्होंने हमारे मरीज कहते हैं सर पैर में आसानी फर्क हुआ है पैर में सब फर्क हुआ है and this we have already devised it. But before this, I'll tell you that pain can be recorded. Now WHO, World Health Organization has told that pain should be recorded. जैसे आप पीपीआर नहीं रिकॉर्ड करते टेम्परेचर, पल्स, रेस्पिरेशन, ब्लड प्रेशर, and this is fifth vital sign. This should be recorded every shot. Whether you are in post-operative ward or intensive care, it should be recorded. So pain should be recorded. This was devised, WHO told you now, this was devised in 1993. The pain should be recorded like this. So kitna pain hai, then the nurses and doctors they can give instruction. So pain should be recorded. So in 2017, it has been estimated that 15 to 20% of population have acute pain, and about 25 to 30% of population has some sort of chronic pain. Another important thing, that small children they do feel pain. Even child in the intrauterine life feel pain. So one must be careful that when we are doing circumcision, etc., चलो बच्चे की circumcision कर दो और कोई कर नहीं होगा. You must give local blood. Now, just I was telling you how to measure pain. This is Pakistan point scale which has already been published in journals. It is nothing but small scale. Same thing, shadeed dart on this side and thumb dart on that side. So patient puts their hand on this, whatever he decides, he can do it. We have our local device. Now, key points are there. Up to 90% of patients with low back pain recover within 1 month. हमारे पास हर 5वां पेशेंट जो होता है सर बैठे का होता है. आप कुछ भी न करें तो 1 महीने को ठीक हो जाता है. The majority of the acute problem resolved in a focusing way and can be managed by primary health care systems. Only 15% patients can be given definite diagnosis and majority have non-specific back pain. 80% of the population will experience at least one episode of disabling low back pain during their lifetime. So, this is just the ABC of pain management. You are also specialized in nursing for that. You have to have complete history whenever you examine the patient. Now, another important thing, in our army, most of the people they have got amputation. हाथ कटा हुआ है कहते हैं मेरे हाथ में दर्द है, टांग कटी है कहते हैं मेरे पाँव में दर्द है, लोग कहते हैं जब पागल है, तो it's not पागल. Definitely they have got pain, phantom pain, and it's very difficult to treat phantom pain. आप जो मर्जी करें, there are 50 types of different treatment has been suggested for phantom pain, but not a single one. Now what we have seen now, we have got 1 lakh amputees in our army here, which has been doing war, etc. Few of them they are still there. And what we give them transcutaneous electrical stimulation. ये electrode लगा होता है, it is just a TNS, कहते हैं transcutaneous electric. And most of the people they are very good. If they have a pain in the stem, we give local infiltration. लगाते हैं neuroma वगैरह होता है. Now, similarly, cancer patients every year, 6 million new cancer patients are diagnosed in the world. More than 4 million die, 10% of all deaths, and 70% of the patients are dead. So both are. Now what we are doing from higher education, we are taking the patient with a cancer pain should not die with the patient. मैं हमेशा कहता हूँ कि अगर पेशेंट कैंसर पेशेंट को मरना है, he should die with dignity. कि ये ना कि घर वाले सारे बीमार हो और उसके बाद पेशेंट को हाई कर रहा है और वो बड़ी एडमिट कैंसर पेशेंट बल्कि भी कोई कैंसर पेशेंट बार बार लेते नहीं, बिस्तर नहीं हमारे पास. So at least we can do a palliative care, we can relieve pain. For many of the physician students have MSc level for God's sake, you don't cure anything to the patient who is suffering from cancer. ये हमारे motto है. So you can cure anything for another patient, but not for the cancer. Now, WHO has devised this thing. अब थोड़ा सा पेन हो तो अब नीचे दवाई देना उसको, non-opioid. थोड़ा पेन ज़्यादा हो जाए तो ओपिएट के साथ कोई और चीज़ ऐड कर दें, और ज़्यादा दर्द हो जाए तो नॉन ओपिएट देना शुरू कर दें. This is WHSA. Not necessarily you should leave everything to the WHO, but there are patients who will have pain after this event. You have tried everything. Then you have to add fourth step. And we are doing this fourth step, adding those patient 10%, those who are not seeing relief by anything, जो भी आप निकालें, हमारे पास fentanyl patch नहीं मिलता, हमारे पास morphine नहीं मिलती, हमारे पास पैथेजिन के strong images नहीं मिलते. We have to request other countries to give us fentanyl patch. If you have a fentanyl patch, you can put it on there, then you relief for 10 to 2 hours, no pain. Is that available? Patient who आया था यहाँ, and they were giving like 10,000 के patch, it costs only 50 rupees, and it's available in other countries. So when pain is not relief, you can give drops. Now there are other ways, non-pharmacological methods. You can give transcutaneous electrical stimulation. Simple दो electrode लगा दें, pain or physiotherapist actually they are doing this. Similarly, in rheumatoid arthritis, I know it's very difficult. Methotrexate, so many drugs are being used. Acupuncture also works. And just to tell you, the acupuncture was not known till 1973, and Pakistan was the first country who started acupuncture, who learned from China, and acupuncture doctors came to Pakistan first, then to Pakistan. Now what do we do? Shoulder pain, how long you can go on giving NSAID, etc. Then we have to give drops. Very easy, you can give suprascapular nerve drop, which supplies the shoulder joint. Very easy to give suprascapular. Let's look at this. This is known as CRPS, complex regional pain syndrome. कभी आप देखो प्लास्टर लगा दिया, एक हाथ सूज गया, दर्द नहीं होता. This would you see, ये वाला this is normal and very difficult. This is type of urogenic pain. इसको हमें ब्लॉक लगाना पड़ेगा. Sympathetic block. When all oral drugs fail, what to do next? Then these are things when you do. Then you give intraarticular injections with knee. We can give geniculate nerve block, we give intraarticular injection. Even we are giving plasma, rich plasma plater, PRP. Plasma we are done about more than 100 cases. You take the blood from the patient and centrifugally take the platelet, concentrate, inject in the knee. And very good result with it. So you can do the intraarticular injection with PRP, CRAC and water, so many other drugs. Even backache is not relief. Then you give a facial giant. This is the facial giant. Facial giant का कुछ नहीं होता. If you have got sciatica, pain will be like this. And if you have got facial giant, pain will be on your extension. Simple. When you are standing, if pain is on your extension, it is a facial giant. In facial giant, you have to block एक nerve ऊपर एक नीचे because medial branch supplies both. You have to block medial. So you can block facial giant in back. Very common epileptic patient like that. This you can give acupuncture also. Acupuncture अगर छोटी story सुना दूँ आपको, acupuncture was not recognized till 1994. When we started, I myself did not believe acupuncture can conquer that effect, but I show you it works and it works. And something we used to do. I was in Syria of Golan Heights in 1973. I used to inject this local drops with needle to backache patient. And patient used to say, sir, nothing ठीक हो गई. I did not believe. Because I was a major और जिनको मैं ट्रीट करता था वो स्पाई होता था. स्पाई हमेशा पेशेंट को कहता सर क्या होता ना कि सर ठीक हो. This news spread among the all troops when I was in the Golan Heights. So when I died, the senior people they started coming. युवा जनरल वगैरह जब उन्होंने कहा कि मेरी कमर ठीक हो गई अभी दहर निकले अभी मेरी कमर निकले अभी यानी लोहे की तरह हो गई देन आई थॉट कि जनरल म्यूजिक होता है मैंने कहा जनरल कह रहा सच ही कहता होगा देन आई स्टार्टेड बिलीविंग कि acupuncture really works when all that are available you can try acupuncture also. This is acupuncture. Still, if pain is not relieved, you can give epidural, very simple. हम शरीर में वर्क कराते रहते हैं, epidural catheter डाल देते हैं. Then in the epidural space, very easy to do. Bottle or epidural for pain relief. You can turn it, you keep it for 50 minutes. and you can provide even with an outside device, you go and inject it through the epidural. So there are so many ways and means to do that. But it is a definite special specialty. There are 46 specialties in field. So in conclusion, they should release the patient and treat it accordingly as soon as possible. Thank you very much. Question पूछना अभी तक तो मैं चल जाऊँगा।
सर आप उठेंगे
हैं?
आप उठेंगे सर। Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, Honorable Brigadier Salim Sahab. Our next talk is how to manage a neuropathic pain, and speaker is our Head of Medicine Department, Professor Brigadier Retired Muhammad Farooq Khattar, and may I request Farooq to एक अनाउंसमेंट ये है कि ये फॉर्म शायद सर्कुलेट हो गया है। ये पाकिस्तान मेडिकल जर्नल काउंसिल की रिक्वायरमेंट है कि ये फॉर्म और ये अटेंडेंस सारी जमा करवानी होती है इसकी सर्टिफिकेशन के साथ। दिस सेमिनार इज accredited for 3 hours by पाकिस्तान मेडिकल जर्नल काउंसिल CME। ये इस पे दोनों ही साइन करने हैं, शुरू के भी और आखिर के भी। ये 2 स्लॉट्स हैं यहाँ साइन करिए, सिग्नेचर एट द स्टार्ट, सिग्नेचर एट द एंड, काइंडली साइन इट बिफोर पेज and then return it on student.
Assalamu alaikum, respected judges. I will try to make it more brief because आपके बारे में सोच के सबके दर्शन होगा। Basically, neuropathic pain is a maladaptive pain which results from damage to the nervous system, which may be peripheral nervous system, dorsal root, and maybe central nervous system. And it is a complex syndrome which can have negative and positive phenomena. The negative symptoms are the sensory deficits such as partial or complete loss of sensation, and the positive symptoms they include dysesthesia, paresthesia, and severe pain. Symptoms you see it may be in the form of persistent or paroxysmal pain that is independent of stimulus. There is no stimulus but patient can have persistent or paroxysmal pain, and it can be shooting, it can be lancinating or burning depending upon the activity of the sympathetic nervous system. Spontaneous activity in nociceptor C fiber is thought to be responsible for the persistent burning pain. Spontaneous activity is largely in myelinated A fiber is related to stimulus independent paresthesia. Stimulus evoked pain, common component of peripheral nerve injury or damage, and it has 2 features: hyperkinesia and allodynia. Sometimes it should be difficult, the patient cannot describe it the way you read it in the books. So these are the few actual how the people describe the feel. I feel as though someone has pulled the skin of my left arm and is then constantly rubbing salt into the wound. So this is the patient's own way of description of the pain. Another person may say that I feel as though my leg is on fire. My skin feels burned and it is as tough someone is taking a claw and tearing into my skin 24 hours a day. You can imagine the intensity of the agony. Another way that I feel as a tough someone has taken a hot poker knife and is jogging deep into my right eye. The neuropathic pain syndrome can be peripheral nervous system, which is focal and multifocal lesion, It can be peripheral nervous system with the generalized type of polyneuropathy, and it can be central nervous system lesion and then complex neuropathic disorders. Previously, also the slides are being shown, so you can see these are the type of the focal and multifocal lesions, and this is very important for suspected neuralgia and trigeminal neuralgia like this. And then these are the generalized polyneuropathy, in which is the diabetic polyneuropathy is the most important, and of course autoimmune Guillain-Barré syndrome, and as a paraneoplastic syndrome in case of malignancy. And these are the central nervous system lesions, spinal cord injury, especially prolapsed disc, cervical spondylosis, multiple sclerosis, and certain cervical lesions. Then these are the complex neuropathic syndromes, which can be type 1 or type 2. These are the common most causes of neuropathic pain. Among the diabetic neuropathy and post-operative neuralgia, and of course cervical and lumbar neuropathy, they are at the top. As the slide has been shown by previous Salim, you see this. This is the small questionnaire that you can put, and from here you can make up your mind that it is acute neuropathic pain. See, there is one mark for each, and if it is a known giant pain, it carries -1. And it is said if the score is equal or more than 3, then most probably it is neuropathic pain. Different assessment tools have already shown in previous study. So management, I will talk of pharmacological management. You see, these are non-opioid, opioids, and then the analgesic. These are the interventions, the therapies which previous study has told in detail. This is algorithm. This you can see this when there is neuropathic pain. So is it post-operative neuralgia and other focal neuropathy? If it is yes, then lidocaine patch can be more effective. If it is no, then you have to see whether there is any contraindication to tricyclic antidepressant. If it is yes, then start with gabapentin and pregabalin. And if there is tricyclic contraindication again, then you can go to the, if it is not improving with that, you can go to the opioids analgesics. Or if there is no contraindication, then you can use combinations can also be used. So these are again the same group of medicines. These are the anti-epileptic medicines. They are very important and very commonly used. Antidepressant, opioid analgesics like Tramadol, and then these are the local. Then this is complementary therapy in the form of acupuncture, nutritional counseling, and massage therapy is very important. And these are certain other types other than the rehabilitative approaches, and psychological intervention is very important because as previous Salim has already said that acute pain, there is anxiety along with it, and in chronic pain there is always depression along with the pain. So you have to use these approaches along with these. These are few commonly used medicines. So carbamazepine, the dose is 100 mg to 1000 mg. The side effects, you see there are dizziness, nausea, ataxia, and the contraindications are the liver dysfunction and bone marrow suppression. Gabapentin, again multimodal action, it reduces ectopic activity and central sensitization and decreases glutamate activity. Dose is 300 to 3000 mg per day. Side effects, dizziness, sedation, weight gain, and contraindication is hypersensitivity. These are just few commonly medicines. I just narrated the dose and side effects. And pregabalin, again 75 to 600 mg per day divided doses, and these are the side effects and the contraindication of the hypersensitivity. Tricyclic antidepressant commonly is imidacloprid, dose is 10 to 75 mg, preferably at night time. Side effects are anticholinergic, constipation and confusion. and contraindication of the narrow angle glaucoma, urinary retention, especially prostatic hypertrophy, and the heart blocks. Ketamine dose 0.5 mg per kg to 1000 mg. Side effects are delirium, hallucination, confusion, night terror, and contraindication of the hypersensitivity and psychiatric disorders. Again, Dexlocaine, 5 mg per kg over 1 hour. Side effects are hypotension and neuropathy. Tramadol, opiates, analgesic. Dose is 50 mg to 400 mg per day. Side effects are sedation, nausea, and contraindication of hypersensitivity or excessive dosage. This is, you see, special type of medicine where the others are not effective. You can use this, and these are the common side effects which can happen to these people. So, a stage comes where if you use multiple drugs, the patient becomes resistant to it, and the neuropathic condition is resistant to pharmacotherapy when mono or patient combination treatment using drugs proved efficacious and RCTs help in reducing pain. लिटरेचर में तो कहते हैं कि पेन को रिलीव करते हैं, लेकिन उस पेशेंट में वो इस्तेमाल करने से रेजिस्टेंस हो जाती है and the patient does not feel relief. So the drug fails to produce the response and produces intolerable side effects. So the quality of life is decreased, symptom decreases, and because of successful medication, it is very expensive. So to conclude with, as I said earlier that I will be brief, I hope I was very brief. So more effective medical therapies for neuropathic pain are becoming available, and physicians should use them to limit necessary suffering with ultimate goal of significantly improving patient quality of life. With this, I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Mohtaram Professor Brigadier Farooq Saab, Head of Department, Internal Medicine, Islamic Medical College. We will have question and answer at the end, and we now have the final talk of the session. And speaker is Brigadier Mushtaq Ahmed. He is FCTS medicine, and then he has on-job training in rheumatology in the United Kingdom, and he is retired as a rheumatologist from Military Hospital Rawalpindi. May we request him to talk about chronic arthritis indications for surgery. So this is not always medicine work. Occasionally it may come to level of surgical intervention for pain management. Brigadier Professor Mushtaq Ahmed.
And with due regards to my senior brigadier Salim and Brigadier Farooq, you might be at the brim of your tiredness, but of course not frustrated, I suppose, because they are all professional. You may get tired, but never frustrated, and they have opted for it. So enjoy the day. And the new topic that is pertaining to rheumatology, and fortunately or unfortunately, rheumatology is yet passing through a stage of evolution in the developed countries. It is well developed, and there are various subspecialties available in the rheumatology as well. And joint pains is one of the commonest human symptoms experienced. Since the inception of subspecialties, the cardiology, rheumatology, nephrology, and so on, the rheumatology physician and other subspecialty trained physician throughout the world, they preferably work in collaboration, and an integrated approach is adopted for the better patient management and care. And I think this is the best outcome-based strategy in terms of patient benefit. Because human body is one, and it can't be dissected professionally. So the subspecialty borders, they are imperceptible. The same disease affects different organs, so a collaborative approach is mandated. So coming back to the topic, the joint disease is, in simple word, called the arthritis or arthritis. From your knowledge of pathology and anatomy, you might be knowing what is a joint and what are the different types of joint. Those joints were lined by the synovial membrane and they are relatively more mobile. They are called synovial joint. Like the upper limb and lower limb joints. There are joints which are little rigid and they can confer less mobility, but they provide rigidity to the structure, the human skeleton, like the axial skeleton joint, the spine, and the sacroiliac joint. The disease process may involve any joint, maybe synovial or the fibrous joint. And the joint diseases they could be classified into inflammatory or non-inflammatory. From your knowledge of pathology, the left and the right hand will be knowing more what is inflammation. Whenever there is pain, swelling, the tenderness, and of course loss of function, this fulfill the definition of inflammation. Again, the inflammation may be acute and chronic depending upon the duration. If it persists for more than 6 weeks, it will be termed as chronic. Less than 6 weeks, it will be acute. Now, the non-inflammatory joint diseases, they are mostly, you can say, the age-related, maybe due to overuse, misuse, or inappropriate use of the joints. So they are mostly, there are no signs of inflammation, but the pain of course is there. There may be some other signs like loss of function, they may be there. Inflammatory broadly could be divided based on the cause of inflammation into 4 different groups. I have roughly just put into this classification. The commonest is the autoimmune arthritis, and there is a long and broad, this is a long and broad-based subject, the autoimmune arthritis, involving so many autoimmune disease processes. Second is the infectious and crystal-induced. You might be knowing the crystal-induced arthritis, which are the gout, pseudo-gout, and so many other crystals, which are involved in evoking the inflammatory arthritis in the joint. And traumatic, of course. Trauma is also a cause of inflammation, and the trauma-induced arthritis could be termed as inflammatory arthritis. Of course, it could be, if it is long and sustained trauma, this could be termed into degenerative category as well. But in most of the cases, it induces acute arthritis, cause of acute arthritis. Now this is, how will you differentiate that this arthritis is inflammatory or non-inflammatory? Of course, when there are signs of inflammation, they may help in differentiating the non-inflammatory from the inflammatory. But there are certain structural changes which may depict that this is a non-inflammatory or inflammatory. Now you see, this means, what is it? What? What is it? That's right. Now you see, this is an X-ray picture of spondyloarthritis. This is inflammatory low back disease, chronic inflammatory low back disease. If you see, both the sacroiliac joints, they are almost fused. The spine is fusing, and at the same time there is involvement of both the hip joints. Almost there is obliteration of the hip. Now this is the normal X-ray of the knee. The joint space is preserved. Now this is the X-ray of the patient with advanced osteoarthritis of the knee. As you see, there are osteophytes formation. There are some bone cysts, and there is loss of joint spans on the medial compartment. Fibula is on the outer compartment, so there is the lateral compartment. The lateral compartment is lateral reserved, here the cartilage, but the medial compartment is almost totally obliterated. And similarly, this is the spine. There are osteophytes formation. There is malalignment of the spine. So these changes, they suggest the non-inflammatory disease or joint involvement. Have you seen such like hands? What does it depict from the undergraduate student? No? Inflammatory arthritis of the hand joints. This picture could be in other hand arthritis as well. But the commonest one is, you are right, the rheumatoid is the commonest. Now this is the fairly advanced stage. You see almost the Z deformity of the thumb, ulnar deviation, subluxation of the metacarpophalangeal joint. The synovial hypertrophy is there. You appreciate? These are all the hypertrophied joints, metacarpophalangeal joint, and you see the X-ray picture showing the different joint subluxation. The wrist is almost totally ankylosed, and this is the typical picture of the bamboo spine. Have you heard about the bamboo spine? Yes. Yes, good. Now this bamboo spine depicts the advanced stage of ankylosing spondylitis. Ankylosing spondylitis is the prototype of the seronegative spondyloarthritis, which is a group of three diseases which fulfill a common criteria. One is the ankylosing spondylitis, second is the psoriatic arthritis, the reactive arthritis, and the enteropathic arthritis, which is associated with chronic inflammatory bowel diseases. So the purpose of showing these is that these patients has got significant structural damage, anatomical damage on these joints. They could be helped to some extent with the medicinal treatment in the form of NSAIDs, steroids, disease-modifying anti-rheumatic drugs. Now we are having even the biologic demand as well. But when there is structural damage and the functional compromise in terms of mobility, in terms of day-to-day work, and particularly in case of ankylosing spondylitis, with the kyphosis develop, spinal deformity develop, they even induce respiratory embarrassment. The patient develops restrictive airway disease, and due to the rigidity of thoracic cage, the patient may not be even able to breathe. So, going further ahead, we have to pick the patient that when, how the patient should be referred to surgeon for assistance or for intervention. So we must be crystal clear. As I showed you the X-ray, that whenever there is structural damage, gross structural damage, it could not be corrected by medicine. So surgical intervention will be imperative. indicated, highly indicated. Okay? Now, there are two types of surgical intervention required. One is diagnostic and the other is therapeutic. Diagnostic is, suppose you get a monoarticular involvement of the joint. Suppose knee is chronically inflamed. So the other differential diagnosis of chronic monoarthritis comes infectio, chronic infection, granulomatous, like tuberculosis and the brucellosis, Lyme disease and things like that. So if you put the patient on the immunosuppressant, which are the demand, they can flare up the disease. So to differentiate if the patient is not having underlying chronic granulomatous infection like tuberculosis or brucellosis or things like that, you will do the arthroscopy and synovial biopsy by the surgeon. Suppose patient is having asymmetric sacroiliitis or sacroiliitis with the other features of spondyloarthritis are not visible. Which infectious disease can cause sacroiliitis other than autoimmune from the left side audience? Brucellosis. Brucellosis can cause sacroiliitis and spondylitis like the other autoimmune diseases like cytomegalosis, spondyloarthritis. Tuberculosis. So, if the things are not clear for the management, you have to take biopsy of the sacroiliac joint. Clear? To be sure that you are not dealing with a chronic infectious disease process. So these are the diagnostic indication where the surgery will be required. Clear? Achha. No therapeutic. Suppose the patient is having knee osteoarthritis of the knee and he or she is experiencing frequent locking of the knee. He is unable to walk, the knee at times become totally locked and he is unable to extend it. So, if there are loose bodies, fragments, ligament fragments are there. So you can do the arthroscopy and you can remove those fragments and those loose bodies that the patient will be pain-free and the mobility will be restored. Second is, if the patient is having some ligament rupture, you can do the arthroscopic repair of that ligament as well. And that will fasten or that will be expedite the healing process. Now, you can do the joint wash, frequent joint wash in case of infectious arthritis because there is adhesion formation. So if the patient is having pyogenic arthritis, you have to do frequent joint wash so that adhesion formation they are restricted and the joint may not get compromised later on. Clear? Now, one is arthroscopy and the other is joint replacement, total joint replacement. Again if you go back to that slide which I mentioned, the knee was totally compromised. So if there is total structural damage, total obliteration of the knee space, it will be an indication of the total knee replacement or total hip replacement. If there is patient has got verum or genoverum or vulgum deformity, there is bowing of the legs inward or bowing of the legs outward. Again, this will compromise the mobility and the answer will be joint replacement. Suppose the patient cartilage damage is less, but he cannot bear NSAIDs because of the intolerance or because of the he is allergic to NSAID or in any way, particularly those patients who are having inflammatory bowel disease, moderate, and then the NSAIDs are contraindicated because NSAIDs will flare up the disease process, inflammatory bowel disease. So if there are contraindications to the NSAIDs, or there are clear views that the patient could not be offered NSAID because of the underlying more severe disease, organ-related disease, then you can opt for the joint replacement to relieve the pain and restore mobilities. Clear? Now there are situations in which you can fix the joint, which is called arthrodesis. Suppose the patient is having neuropathic ankle with foot drop. Now, ankle, you have to just keep the ankle midway between the dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. Arthrodesis will be the best option to, if it is irreversible. If it can't be helped with general physiotherapy and other measures, then the best way is to arthrodese the ankle. Clear? Suppose the patient is having the flex deformity of the knee, and the indication for the replacement is not very valid. So you can arthrodese just to keep the knee in extended position. That will at least improve the mobility, and the other knee and the hip and the leg will not be affected by the mal-rotated movement of the individual. Clear? So the options are between the arthrodesis and the joint replacement. Now there are cases when, particularly in rheumatological disorders, the patient is having baggy, thickened synovium protruding out of the joint space, and remember that whenever the synovium is there, it is a source of chronic inflammation. You have been doing the drugs, you have been giving the intra-articular injection, but it is not working. It is just like you remove the pleura. You do the pleura, remove the pleura whenever there is persisting or recurrent joint diffusion or nothing like that. Similarly, you can remove the synovium. So the source of inflammation will be, and the source of autoimmunity will be removed. So another thing is kyphoplasty. In connection to the seronegative spondyloarthritis disease, as I mentioned, if the patient is having severe kyphosis, that will compromise his respiratory function, mobility, and these bones, they are liable to fracture. These are rigid, but they are fragile. So the patient, if the patient gets a little impact or low trauma, they are likely to break their bones. So you can do corrective surgery, spinal surgeon do it, kyphoplasty on those patients. Other importance are that you might have heard about the carpal tunnel syndrome and tarsal tunnel syndrome. Now, carpal tunnel syndrome? Now, the carpal tunnel syndrome and tarsal tunnel syndrome, they are called entrapment neuropathies. Now, if they are mild, there is just the patient is symptomatic. You can use the slant, you can use the steroid injection. But if the compression is more advanced, it will result in muscle weakness. The grip will be loose. The patient बताते हैं ना जब बहुत ज़्यादा advanced carpal tunnel syndrome होता है कि ये चीजें गिर जाती हैं, they can hold it firmly. So this is the time that the nerve should be released. So these are additional surgical indications, the entrapment neuropathy advanced leading to muscle. Now the most important, which may be life-threatening, is the, in relation to rheumatoid arthritis, that is the subluxation of atlantoaxial joint. This is life-threatening. Whenever there is clinical indication and whenever there is valid nerve conduction studies and radiological evidence that the patient is having atlantoaxial subluxation, before wasting time he should be subjected to surgery, corrective surgery. Clear? So these are some important indications which you must remember that when the patient has to be referred for surgical consult and do the surgical intervention. These are just to reply to that says the hip prosthesis that is in these patients are now significantly mobile without pain and without any compromise. So the indication for surgery should be clear, valid, and just in the best benefit of the patient. And when they are there, then there should be no delay. Okay? Thank you very much.